Counter-Narrative News, bringing you daily news today on Wednesday, the 15th of February 2023. There has been reports in East Africa into Arabia. There's a 65% increase of migration through the so-called Eastern Migration Route, which is basically East Africa, Eritrea, Somalia, Ethiopia, Djibouti, going across the sea into war-torn Yemen and then into Saudi Arabia. Often Riyadh and Saudi Arabia is often the destination of migrants on this route, and it's like all the other routes, the Turkish-Greek route, the Libyan Mediterranean Sea route, and even the South Central American route to the US-Mexico border sees a massive amount of people trafficking, exploitation of human beings, rape, abduction, etc. And with East Africa, with the increase of poverty in East African countries, with the proliferation of destabilization, violence and conflict, this is all leading, and of course climate change as well, in terms of the massive droughts across East Africa, particularly devastatingly impacting Somalia, with many Somalis who rely on agriculture and animal husbandry arguing that climate change is just not delivering water, and if there's no water, the animals die. If the animals die, then the humans die, because the humans are reliant for their babies from the animal milk and meat and general relative wealth in the possession of the family. That's all disappearing. Very much so across the world. If villages run out of water, that creates massive migration into the cities and migrant routes across borders as well. And this is what we're seeing in East Africa. Many people end up dead on these migrant routes from starvation, from attack, from rape and killings, etc. And what's developing here, interestingly, where historically up to recently it's been mostly single men or lone young men traversing on these horrific migrant routes, now you're seeing lone children and young women also. We've watched a documentary recently about the Eastern Migration Route, and you see these men going through the desert in Ethiopia to the sea and just coming across dead bodies of young women. It's very sad. And the other sad aspect and real tragic aspect to all of this is that this human migration today, because of climate change and often because of Western policies of destabilization, poverty and conflict, is not seeing any global leadership of any type of semblance at all. There's a few Western-based liberal NGOs and liberal culture that speaks to this issue, but beyond that there is no radical grassroots leadership. Rather, the right wing and the far right are constantly successfully instrumentalizing this in their sordid agenda. Connected to this, also, the United Nations chief Antonio Guterres at the recent UN Security Council meeting warns of rising sea levels across the world because of climate change, the melting of glaciers, etc., leading to the eradication of entire areas and regions of countries. Obviously, the islands in the Pacific Ocean, also Bangladesh, and in Indonesia and other places are very vulnerable and susceptible to this, and it's already impacting, as we've seen with the devastating floods, which the melting of the glaciers in the mountainous areas around South Asia are making flooding even worse, putting a third of the country underwater, and this itself will also push forward the amount of people taking these migrant routes across borders and traversing to where the historical looting by colonialism has deposited this wealth, and that's in Western capitals and places like England. Going to the politics of Scotland, Scottish National Party's leader Nicola Sturgeon and the First Minister of Scotland has resigned after 8 years in leading her party, after winning 8 elections in 8 years. In terms of polling, one of the most successful and popular politicians, well, head and shoulders above any other political leader, that's Nicola Sturgeon. However, the independence movement was defeated at the Scottish referendum nearly 10 years ago now in 2014 by just a few percentages. which really was the first historic major victory of the Tory far-right state and government, and it was the biggest constitutional political crisis which the British state has faced, with the Scottish independence movement being a real and actual threat in a leftist direction to the colonial UK state. That arguably has been scuppered. The movement split. The movement split really in accordance with the modern culture wars between the left and the liberals on the one hand and the right and the far right on the other hand, with the previous leader of the SNP and Scottish independence movement, Alex Salmond, attaching himself to the right-wing oriented side of this culture wars. And in this regards, Moscow and Putin and Alexander Dugin's Russia Today media platform, in which Alex Salmond has had a TV program, has been somewhat influential in dragging Alex Salmond into this kind of sleazy, trashy, toxic right-wing political community and culture. And on the other hand, Nicola Sturgeon has been playing out her own inner Hillary Clinton in her liberal postures, and in so doing, the potential radical nature of the grassroots independence movement has been basically neutralized. And in that, London has been successful in neutralizing that threat going forward. The independence movement has been unable to go beyond the leadership of Nicola Sturgeon on the one hand and the aforementioned hitherto leadership of Alex Salmond, and they have not produced a socialist-oriented radical grassroots working class-based movement, which one thought they may have been able to potentially develop. But such is the nature of the political control of Alex Salmond and particularly Nicola Sturgeon in this regard, it seems going forward that strategic threat to the capitalist colonial state in Britain from Scotland is no more. And is somewhat connected to this as well is that it seems quite clear that the British authorities seem to have facilitated and organised their leading far-right figures in the English and British context to be strategically deployed into the Irish context. So Nigel Farage and Tommy Robinson, real name Stephen Yaxley-Lennon, are championing and celebrating the growing anti-migrant far-right political community in Ireland. Now, what's going on here is quite interesting, because Ireland also remains a weak, precarious point in the attempts of the UK state to guarantee its monopoly of control and stability going forward. Especially around Brexit, the Irish dynamic really opened up a strategic weakness for Britain in regards to that. Now, Brexit always was a movement that had centrally to it a vicious and violent anti-immigrant racist component. And if then the British authorities or the British and the British far-right community are helping to develop this Irish version of Brexit, the Irexit, being centered on anti-migrant politics, then it seems at the moment that they're having great successes in that. And then the vestiges of radical Irish republicanism in the form of Sinn Féin, arguably they're not Irish Republicans anymore, they're involved in a constitutional reformist and perhaps civil rights movement in UK colonial structures. It's arguable and possible that Sinn Féin will be outflanked and out-organised and will be defeated by the growing capacity of the Irish far right. That if then the Irish far-right community challenge politically the left and the liberals in the form of Sinn Féin and the Irish socialists, then what London, the colonial state in London, has as a result, it would have then captured Ireland in harmony and synchronization of its own state interests going forward. So this is a really interesting and fascinating but very dangerous and concerning development in Ireland. Stephen Yaxley-Lennon, Tommy Robinson, is currently in Ireland himself. This is creating some controversy because obviously Yaxley-Lennon, Tommy Robinson has made his political career and his political relationships today very much centered in supporting, in the most far-right nationalist toxic way, the British Army, and also quote-unquote Soldier F, those British Army personnel that have conducted anti-Irish massacres in the occupation of Ireland. This is creating some level of controversy amongst Irish people. However, when it comes to racism, the central component of racism, anti-migrant, white supremacy will always scupper any other politics and any other sensitivities of any other political issues. So arguably, racism is not going to be defeated by claiming Tommy Robinson is pro-British Army, because Irish racists, like any other racist, that's not their priority, that's not their concern going forward. So really something to watch very carefully there. That's Counter Narrative News, bringing you daily news. Please continue to support us by encouraging your networks and friends, etc., and colleagues to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter at @counter_CNN. We wish you a fantastic day. Thank you.